All right, and next up we have Patricia Williams on trauma and giftedness, a unique intersection.
Thank you. I'm really glad I'm hiding behind a podium because I tend to get like kind of shaky. My body does this nervous thing. My brain's telling me, no, you're fine. And my body's like, oh my God. So I'm glad I'm hiding behind the podium. However, I do have a psychomotor overexcitability that makes me want to walk around. So I'll try not to wander from the microphone. Please let me know if I do. I don't necessarily like hearing the sound of my own voice. Okay, I like hearing the sound of my own voice. I don't like it amplified. Makes me also a little nervous and jittery. This will calm down as I present more. And please, at any point, if you feel like you didn't understand what I said, either because I mumbled, talked too fast, or if it's just a concept that I assumed that the universe knows, but only Patty knows, and Patty's brain tells her stories, please let me know and stop me. We can go back to different slides, but I always want to stop for understanding. That's important to me. So, okay. So my name is Patty Williams. Just skip that one. My name is Patty Williams. I am first a therapist and mother and educator. And who was it yesterday said I'm a whisperer? Yeah, there we go. I'm a whisperer, apparently, because we're figuring that out. So with my therapy, I do primarily trauma therapy, EMDR-based, DBT, some internal family systems. I work in Gestalt. I could say that I'm eclectic, but really I'm intuitive. And then I pull in what tools I can, right? I learn what I can so I can use it. I'm also the co-founder of Bright Insight, which is an organization that started in Tucson, Arizona, basically because there was a need in that area for support for gifted and twice exceptional individuals. This is now spread out. The most popular event we probably do is the Bright Insight Table Talks, which are monthly conversations basically about different topics affecting gifted, twice exceptional, neurodiverse individuals, neurodivergent. I'm also a PhD student. I'm working on my PhD in developmental psychology with dissertation work on development through adolescence. So what Patty was saying was really fantastic to me and Linda. And looking at just naturally what that developmental process looks like from the perspective of highly satisfied adults. So people who have made it through that journey. We don't want to say highly satisfied, highly successful adolescents, because really, how do you define that? How did we get through this without inhibiting it, and can we look at that and operationalize it? Faculty at my local community college. Okay. I hope I didn't touch something. I may have touched something. Joy, let me know if I did. Okay. And for that, I teach psychology and first year college students, how to be successful in school, fun stuff. Yes, wife, mother, INFJ, if you're familiar, empath, farmer. I have 12 goats, 5 sheep, 3 pigs, 12 ducks, 2 geese, 6 turkeys, a bunch of chickens, a desert tortoise, 3 Great Pyrenees, an 8-foot fence around 5 acres, and that's kind of my me time. Sorry, my education. Twice exceptional daughters. 1 dropped out of high school and went straight into college. 1 graduated high school early and dropped out of college. There's no one right way to do this. So, some of my background. Okay, the topic, however, is trauma, giftedness, and how they interact. I put intensities in parentheses really for when I do this presentation for people who aren't as familiar with Dabrowski's theory of process integration. However, that's really what I talk about. I was talking to Peter last night about that, and I can't remember what the exact question was, but something to the effect of, do you think we're doing our clients a disservice by not going into more of the theory, the dynamisms, and that sort of thing? Yes, and
maybe not, you know, we don't have every dynamism every day, right? Those of us who have 5 overexcitabilities, 3, 2, we have those every day. And so when I'm talking to clients, students, friends about overexcitability, there's this light bulb that happens, right? And I think it happened possibly for a lot of us as we became exposed to the Dabrowski theory of positive disintegration. And a lot of times that light bulb moment happens through the overexcitability. So that's a wonderful focus also for therapy, and it's validating. So that's why I really focus on that. We may talk about the science behind somatic responses. We may talk about some strength-based skill building. We may talk about some post-traumatic growth. However, this is a really long presentation that I'm squeezing into a very small amount of time. So really it's that first part, that trauma giftedness and how they interact. So, and as you notice, that's called part 1. This is one way to interpret trauma. And if you read the DSM-5, you may find a slightly different interpretation of trauma. We all know to a certain extent what trauma is, but it's really important to operationalize it, right? Trauma, according to the Trauma-Informed Care Implementation Resource Center, however, is that it's a pervasive problem that results from exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening. And that or is important because in the past we've looked at actual life-threatening when we're relating to trauma, or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. That sounds familiar, Patty. And then for some of us who do trauma work or are familiar with trauma, sometimes we look at trauma in different ways. Who here has heard of big T trauma or little t trauma? How familiar are we? I may do this presentation or something similar, and I may have 2 hands out of 40. So we're a little bit more familiar with in this room, which is really nice. I'm glad for that. And if you're not familiar, that's okay. You know, it's not necessarily a wide known concept. Big T trauma is what we kind of think of like that classical trauma. You know, this thought initially that PTSD was reserved for soldiers, right? We had some sort of wartime traumatic event. It could also be something as sudden and more common, possibly as a car accident. It could be a loss of some sort, something that happened, you know, once or a few times or in a short amount of time. That's big T trauma, this big, obvious traumatic event, right? Little t trauma is not called such because it's lesser, right? Little t trauma are those reoccurring events. You know, sometimes maybe abuse, maybe developmental trauma where a child is going through a difficult upbringing or had some bullying in school. It's not necessarily home, it's not necessarily school. Yeah, a few different things. And a lot of times we reserve little t trauma for developmental trauma in children. Adults can experience this too, okay? So you may have a difficult relationship with a spouse, a difficult relationship with a child. This can cause some little t trauma because it's this ongoing, a little bit more complex. And that's actually that last one, complex trauma, varied, multiple. We've got some big T, we've got some little t, we've got some stuff we can't necessarily define that hurts. We feel it, maybe emotionally, cognitively, maybe in our body. We're getting headaches and backaches and stomach aches, right? So, and sometimes that complex and little t trauma can be difficult to define, and therefore sometimes it manifests first in those other places, right? And as I started to talk about this, you may be starting to think about overexcitabilities, and I'm glad you are because we're going there, but not yet. So with a lot of my clients, we look at Maslow's. And the reason we look at Maslow's first is it can be more palatable, right? And depending on what we have going on with that client, understanding this physiological needs, which lead to health and safety, which lead to belongingness, yada, yada, yada. Everybody here familiar with Maslow? If not, talk to me later. Awesome. Okay. So trauma impacts your sense of well-being regardless of what developmental or motivational level you are at. So this is not reserved for people on that, base level of development, right? Not to mention with giftedness, and now we're starting to integrate the giftedness, there can be a separation between what a child can do developmentally and what the world expects them to do. And this isn't only reserved for asynchronous development, right? This is reserved for any child who's given maybe adult expectations or expectations beyond their developmental level, right? So, and I could go into more, but yeah, you can read. So what trauma does though? What does trauma do to us? What does trauma do to us as humans? How, and also as maybe overly excitable individuals, right? First, let's define giftedness. Again, something we're all familiar with, but let's maybe have a common definition for this moment, because keep in mind, everything I'm saying is coming from my perspective, and Dominic spoke to that well. It's one interpretation of this, right? So giftedness is a synchronous development in which advanced cognitive abilities and heightened intensity combine to create an inner experience and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. This asynchronicity increases with higher intellectual capacity. The uniqueness of the gifted renders them particularly vulnerable and requires modifications in parenting, teaching, and counseling in order for them to develop optimally. This is from the Columbus trip in 1991. Now, there's a lot of different interpretations of giftedness and how we so call it. However, this is one I usually use with this particular, well, I use it all over the place because I like this one, but this one I use with this presentation. So, okay. So with a focus on asynchronicity and come on, what's the word I'm looking at, guys? Anyways, overexcitability, it's not in there. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. Huh? Heightened intensity. Thank you. I was looking for it real quick. I'm also dyslexic. Sorry, moving away from the mic. I'm dyslexic as the day is long. So I do a lot with 2E because I am so very. So I'm also extremely, I'm a very human. So you'll see a lot of mistakes and we're just going to count those, right? Okay, so trauma and giftedness. Gifted intensity. I can go over these to a certain extent, assuming that most of you understand these at this point, right? We've been talking about it all morning, all yesterday. You came prepared. We love this theory. We understand these intensities, right? A lot of us use these in the classroom or in our therapy practice or with our children, right? Okay. So understanding these intensities is important, and I'll go into more detail when people really need it, right? So I'm going to assume we're there, and we're going to move on this one. This is where it gets interesting in relation to the trauma work I do. And actually, hopefully, if you guys would like, I would like to invite you to do a small exercise really quick. And this is something the Zoom participants can do as well. And I would invite them to do this also. Now, we're going to look at some images, cognitions, emotions, sensations. So if you don't feel safe in the space you're in, and when I say safe, I mean emotionally safe, like you're comfortable to go there in your current environment, then don't. I'm going to invite you to do this. Do it if you feel comfortable, if you feel so inclined. And if you do, this is what I would like you to do. I would like you to close your eyes. And I want you to think about a difficulty you're currently experiencing. We don't need to talk about big T. This could be I forgot to switch my laundry over from the dryer or the washer to the dryer, and it's sitting there at home getting smelly. If it's that simple, it's that simple. If it's causing you some angst, pay attention to that and identify it. Label it if you'd like. Now attach an image to that. And it can be whatever pops up for you. It doesn't have to make sense. What is the image attached to that trigger? Now I want you to consider a cognition. We have an image related to a difficulty. And when I say cognition, is it, I'm not looking for a paragraph, is it, man, I messed up? Is it, dang it, I'm not good enough? Is it, life is hard and people are mean? There's any number of possibilities. A lot of times there's a negative cognitive message that's happening there attached to those difficulties. And please try not to evaluate if you can. It's not good or bad that you have this cognition, it just is. And so apply some radical acceptance as we go to this. Now, as you have this cognition and this image attached to this difficulty, consider an emotion. Is it fear? Is it anger or sadness? It's difficult to define. If it's not a typical title, that's okay. Come up with some sort of emotion attached to this experience. Take a little longer with this. Sit with it. Feel it. And then move into body sensation. Scan your body head to toe. Where do you feel what you are experiencing? Where do you feel that emotion, that cognition? Maybe you had trouble with one of these. You couldn't come up with an image. That's okay. Where are you feeling whatever is coming up for you? And pay attention to that part of your body, to the quality of the sensation. Is it tingly? Is it tight? Is it achy? Is it heavy? Is it light? Now float back as you pay attention to that sensation and any part of this to a time where you have felt that before. Don't judge what comes up. Pay attention. Maybe keep floating around. Does something else come up? Another experience, another memory. Feel what you're feeling. New cognitions, new emotions. Pay attention without judgment. Sit with it for a little bit. And then when you're ready, open your eyes. Who went somewhere they expected to go? Who went someplace unexpected? Yeah. We didn't go anywhere if you wanted to. We don't always. That's okay too. So you just went through some EMDR. And the part of it that I feel comfortable, stepping into here, right? Because it can pull up some stuff. And it may have pulled up some stuff for you, and you felt it, and you saw it, and you experienced it. And by the way, if you're feeling a little unsettled right now, reach into that box of goodies. Sorry, I wandered again. Reach into that box of goodies, hold something, examine it, play with it. If you need to distance yourself from what I'm saying for a moment, for some time, go there. Do what you need to do at this moment. That's okay. You'll hear part of this in part of your brain. Cool. Or come back to it. Do what you need to do to feel okay. Because I was asking a lot from you guys. by asking you to do that. And I realize that. So if you need to do some grounding at this moment, please do some grounding, right? Okay, so looking back up at the presentation, we looked at a trigger, an image, a cognition, an emotion, a sensation. Does this look familiar at all? Anybody? Does it bring up any ideas? Please. Imaginational overexcitability may be connected to an image. Intellectual excitability may be connected to cognition. Emotional to emotion. Sensual to sensing. Where the heck does psychomotor go? Right? How many of you maybe have a psychomotor overexcitability in this room? Right? While I was asking you to do what you did, no one talked. You all sat still. And if I was going to continue with this with a client, I may do some bilateral stimulation with a light bar, right? Or fingers, or do something bilaterally with buzzers or sound. What happens when we do that is there's actually a de-arousal process. And going through these crises actually helps with that. There's a de-arousal process. So, you know, psychomotor always seems to kind of sit on the edge anyways, right? We don't sometimes know where this guy belongs, but he's certainly supposed to be there. How many of you raise your hand? Pretty much the whole room, right? So, you know, it could be in the trigger, it could be in the work we're doing where we're super grounding and super calm, right? And we have that de-arousal process that happens with the bilateral stimulation where we're moving over midline to opposite sides of our brain. And we actually go into delta waves if you're familiar. So there's this de-arousal that happens, which allows for us to stop going, oh my gosh, I didn't want to think about that. That difficult thing that I was avoiding that maybe happened when you were 2. And you don't even necessarily remember it. But guess what? That 2-year-old became a 3-year-old, and that 3-year-old became a 4-year-old, and the 4-year-old eventually became a 56-year-old. You're like, but I was 2. These things keep going, and we store them. Did you have a question? Yeah. Thank you for asking that. I will. Yes, absolutely. Yes? I am going to. Yes, absolutely. She asked this. Do you think psychomotor comes in with fight or flight? Yeah, right? Because when we're experiencing a trauma, keep in mind when we go back to that definition of what trauma is, we are looking at what it does to us. It's not just that this thing happened. What did it do to us? It got our adrenaline going. It affected us emotionally. And we know, you know, amygdala, if any of you are familiar with the flipped lid or that fight or flight, whoo, right? Our body gets going. And that's where that de-arousal process comes in, and that bilateral stimulation, because then we also engage in what's called dual attention. Sorry, none of this is on the slide. We can certainly chat about it later. So what happens with dual attention is you're doing this bilateral stimulation. I keep pointing to my own head, whatever, you get the point, right? We're doing this bilateral stimulation of some sort, whether we're weaving or walking or watching a light bar. It busies part of our brain, it calms it down, and we're allowed to continue processing what we may be freezing in our brain because it's difficult, right? And it's that fight or flight. And when you go into that de-arousal process, it unhooks us from that fight or flight, right? We're no longer slaves to fight or flight. And fight or flight's there for a good reason, right? We're made to have fight or flight. It's important. However, sometimes it hijacks us, right? So we want to kind of, you know, slow it down, use it when we need to. Sometimes we've used it so much that we've kind of reprogrammed ourselves. So we need to get used to going out into nature, right? Taking a break, lacing, Patty, I'm gonna just talk about you this whole presentation because that was great. Lacing in some fun, right? And when you're doing this work with clients, you're also going in and backing out, and then going back in, and then backing back out, because that allows you to actually process. Plus it gives you a break. You need that, right? Especially if you're doing some trauma work. So looking at this, so there's this integration of overexcitabilities and trauma, right? And so everybody who goes through trauma, whether you're gifted or not, regardless, it's hard. It's meaningful to you. You're holding on to some images, some cognition, some body stuff, right? The interesting thing about individuals with overexcitability is it intensifies even our memories. It intensifies potentially our experience. Now, is that to say your experience is more intense than somebody else's because you have an overexcitability? I am absolutely not saying that because I don't know what they're experiencing. And I would hate to say that what I'm experiencing is more intense than what you're experiencing. It may be, it may not be, it doesn't matter. However, we've got to know if we're working with gifted individuals and gifted individuals with trauma, that there may be some qualitative differences. And something that may sound very simple to me. I saw this. It was disturbing. And we may think, oh, okay, I've seen stuff like that before. Okay, cool, right? Yeah. You can do this. I can do this, so you can do this. What if they have an imaginational overexcitability? Maybe you do too, but it's different than yours. Or they went there and you didn't in that moment, right? So we need to remember that their experience, their thinking, their understanding and interpretation of their environment and the event is different. And it may be more intense. And it very well could be very intense because of those overexcitabilities, right? And we sometimes forget and we relate people to our own experiences because, well, in some ways we should, right? That's how we relate to the world. That's why we encourage travel and reading and exposing yourself to differences, right? And sometimes we remember those exist because we don't necessarily have exposure to overexcitabilities, even if we have them in ourselves, right? So, okay, any questions right now at this moment? I'm talking a lot. And yeah, I guess it's what I'm supposed to be doing, right? I keep looking over here because you have no boundaries, right? You'll let me know how it is. Yeah, yay, so overexcitabilities. And on that note, I've had some conversations with folks about overexcitabilities and about them being good, bad. I'd never wish it on my enemy. I love them, right? And this is where I get kind of dialectic on you. It could be really good. It could be really difficult. And reality, you know, Linda Silverman's article, the two-edged sword of compensation is like gold to me. And the reality is, anytime we're talking about any of these concepts, there's good, there's difficult. They both exist, right? Overexcitabilities can be good, can be difficult. Both things are true. The fact that they're difficult does not exclude or take away from the fact that they're good, right? I mean, you may disagree, and that's okay. But both realities are very important, okay? And your relationship to them is very important. If you're seeing it as all bad or all good, that's real. I'm not going to argue you. Now, I may try to talk you into some other, ways of looking at things. Let it go. Oh, I'm just somatic experience already. That's exciting. What time is it? 12:02, perfect. Okay, so we're looking at overexcitability. We're looking at traumatic experiences. Also, keep in mind asynchronicity, right? Or cognitive dissonance, the what is and what should be, right? In the general field of psychology, we might just generally label that as cognitive dissonance, right? Correctly or not, we're not going there right now, but that's how I conceptually exit sometimes. And I do a lot with cognitive dissonance with clients, and they say, how do you and your damn life do? So I always go like this, you and your damn life do. So, okay. What are somatic experiences? When we're talking about this body work and these work with images and whatnot, does anybody know what somatic experiencing is? And not necessarily the modality, but what it means for something to be somatic. Okay, we've got a kind of and some yes. This is in the body. Work you're doing in the body. And really it's a connection between that mind, the body, spirit, however you want to look at it. And of course, better definition here. And I won't go into it too much because I could go down a whole other direction with this. But Peter Levine has done some wonderful stuff with somatic experiencing and talking about the autonomic nervous system, which I go very biological with some of this sometimes. The autonomic nervous system is triggered into action, resulting in fight, flight, or freeze, right? The NS can become dysregulated when a response to trauma is not resolved, causing the body to respond as if it is under threat when triggered. And somatic experiencing contends that symptoms of trauma such as anxiety, hypervigilance, aggression, and shame result when the body is not attended to, such that the trauma is fully resolved. And keep in mind, we're saying the body is attended to, not just the mind, not just, the emotions, all of it, and not excluding emotions. They're integrated. They exist together and are in constant communication with each other, whether we know it or not, right? So we have this traumatic experience, right? Big T, little t, complex trauma, it could be any of those. And we have a mind and body response. Our mind's involved, our brain's involved in some way, right? We're also feeling something. You may feel sick to your stomach, right? When you experience a trauma or something traumatic or something difficult even. Okay, we can back off from the trauma sometimes. No. Sometimes trauma is a little scary. If you want to, if your brain digests this better and it's more palatable for you, replace trauma with difficulty. That's okay, right? If that helps you understand this a little bit better or more fully, that's okay. If you go through a difficulty even, your body knows it. In your stomach, in your head, in your shoulders, right? How many in here have some back tension right now from sitting, from digesting this, right? Does it mean it's bad? Not necessarily. Sometimes thinking about this stuff just does that. Sometimes we just hold tension because it's there from 3 weeks ago, 3 years ago, 3 decades ago, right? Okay. So your body's holding this sensation, your mind's also holding it, and there's some connection between the two. And we can go into some good old learning psychology. I flew in with that one. I forgot I had graphics. Anyways, there may be this trigger, and then a body trigger, and then an emotional trigger. And these can, by the way, happen simultaneously, right? An intellectual trigger. Wait a second. Are these triggers maybe related to the overexcitabilities? Yes, I'm going there. Okay. Emotional trigger, sensory trigger, any one of those pieces can be triggered, right? You may not be thinking about the difficulty, but your stomach is. And now you have a stomach ache and it triggers this emotional thing related to anger or sadness. And you're not even super aware of it because you may not at that moment be paying attention to your body because you've got shit to do, right? That's okay also. However, taking a moment, paying attention to your body going, what's there? What does this connect to? Can I float back in my mind like we did earlier? Difficult though it may be, right? Look at that, pay attention, examine it, right? And that's what we might ask our students, our children, our therapy clients to do, right? Maybe. Okay, so here's that classical conditioning and stuff that we sometimes steer away from, but it helps us simplify this, right? So we have these triggers, and kind of like Pavlov's dog. Are you familiar? Maybe. Is anybody not? The bell, the food, the saliva. Moving through this quickly. Sometimes when I do this presentation, people are like, what's that? You all know. Okay. And if you don't know, please, this does not mean that you are less intelligent or less tuned in. This is just a thing that's common in a lot of psychological training, right? So let's look at that again. The dog, the bell, the saliva associated with the bell because we associated it with the food. I'm oversimplifying, you get the point. Okay, now let's relate that to trauma. Let's say a parent is yelling at their kid and it's causing that kiddo to have a headache. The kiddo likes to read, right? Reading alone's not a problem. Kid loves to read. In fact, the kid feels really great when they read. Reading's an escape, it's wonderful, right? And then there's some yelling that happens, hey, from the parent or otherwise, but there's some yelling that happens while the child is reading. Okay. Reading now results in stress and headaches. And 10 years down the road, we don't know why. I remember when you were little, you loved reading. Oh man, what happened to you? And yelling happens in about every household, right? And you can blame someone else. I wasn't really a yeller, but my husband may have from time to time. I don't care if he's blaming somebody else for that right now. That's not what I care about. I care about that kid. And that kid eventually becomes an adult. And the adult is not able to get through their schooling program because they get headaches every time they read. That was awesome. Sorry, Linda's little tactile thing just went flying, which I love. This is full permission to play with those toys while I'm talking, and if they go flying across the room, awesome. Please have fun with that. I certainly will. Sorry. Bad Patty. Okay. Does this make sense to people? Okay. So this is why sometimes we flow back particularly on body sensations. You know, and a client could come to my office and not necessarily have a headache in the moment, but I'll go, hey, think about those headaches and how that stresses you out. And come up with an image associated with that. And they may think of themselves sitting there and reading, right? And then we're going through the cognition. Well, I just can't read this. It's just too hard, whatever that cognition is. And we're floating back. And what happens a lot of times when we allow ourselves to, a connection is made. And it may not be at that initial, hey, I was 6 years old and I was reading and got yelled at. It may be something around there. But then as we apply that bilateral stimulation and that de-arousal that allows our brain to wander, it's not voodoo, I promise. It feels like it. I'll tell you a story after this. So what happens is those connections are made and we naturally resolve them because of that awareness and that radical acceptance. Okay, we're now aware that this is what happened. So our brain can naturally do what it does and work through it. And I have clients who have gone through tremendous amounts of trauma. And they tell me about an experience. And we process it, maybe for 3 weeks, maybe for 3 months, maybe for 3 sessions or just one. And they say, and I say, so how are you feeling about that thing? And I'm like, what thing? I kid you not. And I was an EMDR client first. I didn't know this whole thing was going to be about EMDR, sorry. And I was skeptical. And I was like, sure, we'll do this thing that my therapist says we're going to do. Cool. That therapist was horrid. Sorry, I'm not saying her name. But she kept figuring this out. Okay, she's not watching. She's totally unaware of this stuff. Horrible. I'm sorry. A lot of us have had horrible therapists. It's reality. And we've had fantastic therapists. So they exist. I'm a therapist. So letting them go. Horrible therapist, wonderful EMDR. It worked for me. And then I became an EMDR therapist. And then I went, holy crap, this relates to overexcitabilities in gifted individuals. Cool. Because gifted individuals, neurodivergent individuals naturally found me. I didn't ask for them. In fact, I rode a bus with gifted individuals when my kids were in primary school, and I said, I'm never doing that again because they were intense. So, and there we go. Those overexcitabilities play into that. Whether that child is gifted or not, when we consider the overexcitabilities in relation to that child's experience, sorry, I'm not always linear, I pop back to that, hopefully you're following me. When we consider the overexcitabilities in relation to that child's experience, we may understand why that experience was so extreme for them, so over the norm for them, right? I maybe got read or yelled at when I was doing something, maybe it didn't cause an issue for me. Beside the point. One gifted kid is one gifted kid, right? One neurodiverse individuals, divergent individuals, one neurodivergent individual, right? Okay. I'm going to hold off for a second and look at the time. 12:14, and Joy, where'd you go? Okay, I think she said we're going till 12:30, huh? 10 more minutes, fantastic. I do want to pause for a moment because it's really important to me to make sure I check for understanding, for questions. And I'd actually like to pause here for a sec to see if anybody has questions at this point. We're doing good. So clear. Fantastic, that's not typical. Okay. Thank you. I keep looking to you for like, here, are we doing okay? Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. The question was, that's a great question. Do you think trauma and that experiencing can rewire the brain such that it makes a person overexcited? Is that what you're saying? Okay, good question. Maybe. I think there's a biological element. In fact, I've seen that there's a biological element, obviously, to overexcitability, right? It's how you're wired, you know, and it's talked about in Living with Intensity, where it's original equipment, right? So when we're talking about original equipment in biology, we're talking about something that's like physically different, right? And if you've had some sort of trauma that rewires the brain, is there a physical difference there, right? Maybe. I would tend to think that we're looking at some sort of hypervigilance, right? When it's trauma-induced. Have I done research on it? No. I'm not sure. Actually, sorry. I went squirrel on you for a moment there. I apologize. So maybe, and I think being trauma informed, right? Basically trauma informed, we need to be aware that that possibility exists or that their experience is qualitatively different than maybe somebody else's. So though we don't maybe have a definitive answer to that, it matters. I don't know if that's helpful at all as an answer to your question. Okay, yeah, awakening and Dominic's presentation. Yeah, understandable. I'm not going to give you a clear answer on that because I've not done the research. So I love that you're asking the question though, and I think we need to ask that question when we have people sitting in our offices or when we're working with people who have experienced trauma. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's an awesome question also. So she asked about ACEs scores. And for those of you who are not familiar, it's adverse childhood experiences, right? And what this measurement does is it looks at kind of typical childhood experiencing and what may be causing an increase in this trauma experiencing, right? Whether it's abuse in the home or food insecurity, or, you know, I can't think what else on the ACEs, but you get the point. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, exactly. So, you know, does there need to be a different scale for gifted individuals? Again, maybe we should research that. Here's the problem. One gifted kid is one gifted kid, right? And really one kid is one kid, and these are things that are shared. And so we need to look at shared experiences potentially to develop a tool to measure this, which we could do, which my dissertation work may help with. So currently we don't have one, right, to my knowledge, and we just need to see if that's a possibility. And it's a good question to ask because ACEs don't apply to everyone. Yeah.
How is these modified for those who cannot visualize?
I am so glad they asked this. How do we modify things for people who cannot visualize? So, and they may be talking about aphantasia if anybody's familiar. Does anybody know what aphantasia is? Oh, I love, look at all the people in this room who raise their hand. So excited, sorry. Aphantasia is, and I'm gonna oversimplify this also, is an inability to picture in your mind, okay? Super common with our autistic friends and clients and students. My daughter, bless her heart, see, bless her heart's not a bad thing. Okay, anyways.
Texas though?
I know, I grew up in Alaska, dude. Okay, so so she embraces aphantasia. She's also an artist. Dude, that's so cool. I've had a lot of clients who had some level of aphantasia. They were not able to picture things in their mind. Interestingly, maybe also struggle with feeling things in their body. Okay. And what you do is you do modify, and that's why the TICES has several levels: trigger, image, cognition, emotion, sensation. If you can't do all of those, there's not a dang thing wrong with you. We're giving you options. If you can connect to all of those, cool. You may have an increased ability to get there a little faster. You know, and when we're talking about developmental potential, maybe you have all 5 overexcitabilities. Maybe you're able to visualize super well. You may be able to get there faster. Cool, lucky you. Awesome. Maybe not lucky. Maybe you don't want to go there yet. I don't know. Right? So what you do is you focus on other parts of the TICES and you maybe do some guided stuff. Hey, imagine you were the 2-year-old going through this. What did you need at that time? Oh, you needed someone to give you a hug? I want you to imagine giving yourself a hug and being there for you in the way you needed when you were 2. Okay? And they may not be able to picture that, but they can experience it maybe. Okay? Yes.
This is your 5-minute warning. And another question in the chat. Might overexcitabilities increase vulnerability to trauma and the likelihood of experiencing trauma?
Are they asking if they do overexcitabilities increase your likelihood of experiencing trauma?
And a vulnerability to trauma?
And vulnerability to trauma. You know, this question's been asked a lot. Do your overexcitabilities, you know, and you can say increase the likelihood of experiencing trauma. Can they increase first your exposure to trauma? Are you maybe getting into kind of sticky situations? You know, and we don't want to blame the victim in any of these situations or scenarios. However, you know, are you participating in high-risk activities? If you're sensory seeking, maybe. And is it because of overexcitabilities? Well, we know correlation doesn't equal causation. Is it possible? Sure. And maybe they should write their dissertation about that. I don't know. We need a lot of dissertations after the Dabrowski Congress. Holy smokes. Maybe. I'm giving you guys a lot of maybes, but the reality is I don't want to say definitively yes. It could be any number of things that get you there. Now, as far as your experiencing of trauma, you know, qualitatively different, and maybe one experience that's not traumatic for me, you go through it in the same way, it could be traumatic for you. And I tend to believe with overexcitabilities, that is true. Your experiencing of a situation may allow it to feel and be more traumatic. Now, and we won't go too far into this. The question I ask you then is this: does that increase the possibility for post-traumatic growth? You are able to go more deeply into the experiencing of a difficulty. Are you therefore increasingly capable of growing from it? Good question, right? That one is my dissertation. So, part of it. Okay, so yeah, I think you experience it more. I think, pay attention to those words, I think, because your experience, your professional experience, personal experience may be different. This is what I've seen. Okay, any other questions? Whoa, we're finishing on time, John? Had to happen.
Once.
Okay, if you have more questions, please get my email. Look for me on Facebook. Look for Bright Insight on Facebook. A lot of it's anchored in Facebook, and I know a lot of you don't do Facebook, and that's okay. However, that's where I get a lot of involvement. And yeah, I sit at that table, and I'll give my email to anybody who asks for it, because I want to talk about this all day long, every day. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.